was laughing at a joke her sister had said, earlier. She was thinking about it, and then all of a sudden, there was this sense of menace. It was 1965, Canoga Park, California. Jeffrey Valens, then only 10 years of age, was obsessed with the Addams Family TV show, doting on each and every episode, the details and the characters. It eventually lit a creative spark in him, and he set out to bring his favorite show to life in his own way, by making a model of the Addams Family home. I watched the program closely, making notes as I constructed a cardboard replica of the Addams Family haunted house. I tried to duplicate all the details of the house, such as Morticia's famous wicker chair and the stuffed two-headed turtle. It was actually quite an achievement for a boy of his age. The next year, Jeffrey and his family decided to relocate to a new house in the city, not far from where they were currently living. One of the first possessions I took to our new home was my highly prized model Addams Family house. Sadly, not long after settling into this new environment, Jeffrey would discover that somebody, or rather something, was interested in his model home. One day, soon after we moved in, only my mother and I were home, and I was in my room looking at my cardboard haunted house that was placed on a card table, when my mother called me for lunch. In less than an hour, I came back to my room to find the haunted house positioned on the floor next to the table. Not only was the replica house moved, but apparently something else was amiss. Everything was torn up in the model as if an angry little demon had gone wild in it. Items that were glued on the first floor of the model had somehow ended up on the third floor. The strangest thing was that several plastic ghosts that I had glued throughout the model were all gone, never to be found again. It was as if something was enraged by the little plastic ghosts and had torn them all out. Jeffrey searched for a way to explain the chaotic scene, but nothing made sense. It was really perplexing seeing that my mother and I were home and she would never destroy something I made. She always appreciated the creative things that I constructed. The only conclusion I come to is that some unknown entity had spirited away all the little ghosts. I still have the Addams Family house, and what happened to it remains a mystery to this day. When it comes to ghosts, or these unseen possible remnants of once living people that might exist, in some plane somewhere, are they consciously aware of the fact that they're no longer here? And do they get offended by, depictions of them? Like, do they get offended by ghosts that are, movies and drawings, and in this case, like tiny models? I don't know. It's just, I never thought of that before. I've never questioned that before. Like, if there are ghosts around us, are they aware of, how they are depicted? It was the 1920s, Fortean, Texas. The witness, then a young boy, and his brothers were outside playing in the streets. It had rained out all day, so by nightfall the streets were filled with water puddles. Despite there having been a storm, the witness remembered that it was quite calm. Given that it was the 1920s, there wasn't much for kids to do to amuse themselves. No internet, no cell phones, no PlayStation. So they spent much of their time outdoors, hanging out, and given that it was summer, they didn't have to worry about school the next day. The kids had developed a game specifically for the rainy days, similar to hide and seek, only it involved jumping into water puddles. After several hours of playing, the witness and his brothers took a seat on the edge of the street. They talked and laughed, telling jokes and mumbling about all the running. All of a sudden, the witness spotted something moving at the other end of the street close to an underground sewer tunnel. As he stared, he began to make out that these moving things were some kind of creatures. He initially assumed them to be rats coming out of an underground sewer tunnel. There was 5 of them. All the boys were now watching them. They quickly got up, grabbed some rocks, ran down the road, and readied themselves to hurl them at the critters. Though as they got closer, the boys were suddenly hit with the realization that these weren't rats. In fact, they weren't animals at all. They were people, very tiny people. The witness estimated them to be about 8 inches tall. He would later clarify that they appeared to be about the same size as one of those elf-on-the-shelf Christmas dolls. As the brothers stood there dumbfounded, staring at the tiny humans, the witness made out that they seemed to be speaking to each other in a language that the boys did not understand. At least one of the creatures, or whatever they were, spoke to the boys. It seemed to be the only one that spoke English well enough that the boys could understand what it was saying. The tiny creature told the boys that he and the others had been watching them play and that they wanted to join them, but they were forbidden as they were from the underground. The witness, as a boy, took this to mean that their leader, or whomever was in control, forbid interactions with surface dwellers, humans. Before departing, the English-speaking creature confided in the boys that his people had been living underground for, quote, thousands of years, and every 100 or so years they came to the surface to see what the earth looked like. After a short period of conversation, the creature said goodbye to the boys and returned to the sewer, back to their underground world. The boys were left perplexed and amazed at what they had encountered. Afterwards, every time the boys played outside at night, they would always keep an eye on the underground sewer to see if the creatures returned, but they never did. This story was related to a man named Juan V. by his grandfather, who swore that it was true, that it happened. Despite admitting to himself that it was far-fetched, Juan was prone to believe him, as he'd never known his grandfather to lie or make up stories. The grandfather would eventually pass away in 1998, at which point Juan V. wrote down the encounter, noting the various details revealed to him. True Horror Stories of Texas would feature the story on their site in June 2020, in an article titled, "The Little People That Lived Underneath the Street." I've read a lot of underground dweller type cases. I've covered some on this channel, but I've never actually heard of an underground dweller case involving tiny humanoids. That was a first for me. I've never seen that before, and I know that there are, an abundance of tiny humanoid type cases out there. Typically they involve, UFO encounter, alien encounters, or I think John Robert Colombo had a case in his book, one of his books, with regards to some people who were in the North Pole who encountered some tiny humanoids. But I've never heard of it with, involving the underground, people coming up from the underground and being tiny. And so this was a first for me, and I thought it was really interesting. It was 2005. Ann Shenton and her sister Leslie had spent the day shopping and wandering about Windsor, which they did on occasion. It had been a normal Sunday afternoon in late spring. Tourists had begun to arrive in town, as they tended to do that time of year. At some point, the two sisters decided that they needed a drink. A Tameside pub called the Donkey House was their usual choice. It was originally called the King's Arms and told the Fortean times. When we were children, my sister and I used to go there with our father for a lemonade after fishing trips. The pub is still there, but the name and management have changed. After arriving at the bar, Anne and her sister took a seat to the left of the long dark bar, away from the people eating. Both women were smokers, so they did not want to be a bother to the other customers. Remember, this was 2 years before the smoking inside enclosed public spaces ban came into effect in the UK. The two ladies ordered a couple of pints of cider. Leslie wouldn't stop making jokes, which caused Anne to ultimately need to use the bathroom. She wanted to get back to enjoy her drinks, so she promptly showed herself out. To get to the bathroom, one was required to walk up a steep, narrow staircase at the opposite end of the bar. I went up the stairs through a door, up another smaller set of steps that had a huge mirror overhanging them, through another fire door, and into the loo. There were 3 or 4 cubicles. It was a really normal-looking setup, if a little out of date, pinkish and floral. All the doors were closed, so I had to push them to see if they were locked or not, but it soon became evident that I was the only person in there. Inside the cubicle, Anne found herself laughing out loud at one of the jokes her sister had said after it came back to her. All of a sudden, I felt the need to stop, as if someone didn't approve of my laughter, or I'd subconsciously been scolded. The atmosphere changed instantly. It felt electrified. My skin bristled and I felt disturbed. I can only describe the feeling as being like the fear you might experience when faced with a huge growling dog or a crazed drunken lunatic. I was shaking with adrenaline, experiencing confusing smells and images and a sense of primal fear. Anne was overcome with the feeling that she needed to leave, to get away. I had to get out fast. I fumbled with the lock, tore open the cubicle, still rearranging my clothes. I didn't dare stay to wash my hands. I grabbed the door handle and came face to face with the full-length mirror hanging over the steps. My face, but it didn't look like me. The face was terrified. There was confusion and a blur of movement behind me. I flew down the steps. There was another door to contend with, then the last furlong back to safety. My feet didn't touch the ground. If I'd fallen, I wouldn't have felt any pain. I was in the midst of fight or flight, and I was fleeing for my life. I smashed through the last door and into the bar, back to the warmth and light and the living. People turned to see what the commotion was as Anne rushed to the bar. Leslie called out to her, but Anne didn't reply. It was then that the bartender and the sister noticed just how frightened Anne was. When Anne attempted to tell what happened, the bartender promptly apologized. "Oh, upstairs, the toilets. Yes, sorry about that. Are you all right?" He went on, "Listen, next time you need the loo, use the disabled one down here. You don't have to go upstairs again. We've lost a few customers due to that, upstairs in the ladies. Sorry about that." Leslie demanded to know what happened, to which Anne told her of her encounter. It was clear that the bartender knew more than he was telling, so they badgered him to tell them more. He revealed that females had reported seeing a man upstairs, while others had felt the presence of a young woman and a child. But that wasn't all. Staff had regularly seen a man sitting in the farthest corner after last orders were called, only to look over again to see no one was there. The apparition had also appeared after the door was locked and the staff were cleaning up. During cashing up one night, a pint of beer had been thrown across the bar, and other happenings had been reported by staff. Anne, in her write-up to the Fortean Times magazine, indicated that she and her sister never went back to that pub again after that. I knew when I read the toilet ghost case that I had to cover it. How often do you come across cases involving phantoms, ghosts that haunt toilets or restrooms and such? So I thought it was interesting, and I liked the fact that she never actually really saw the ghost. She saw some movement behind her when she looked in the mirror, and she also said that her face, I guess, looked different. It was a really frightened expression, but I guess she said that it was strange enough that she didn't really recognize it, or she wasn't. She was taken aback by it, and I like the fact that her encounter just involves feelings. Like she had this overwhelming fear come over her, and this happens in a lot of cases in which people encounter ETs, but it also happens to people who are out hiking. They'll be hiking along, and all of a sudden they get this this ominous sense that you don't belong here, you got to go. And that's what this girl claimed happened when she was in the bathroom. She was laughing at a joke her sister had said earlier. She was thinking about it, and then all of a sudden there was this sense of menace, like these entities, or whatever entity that might have been in that bathroom, was quite offended by her laughing. So